You check a strange mark on your skin, a mole that wasn't there before, a patch that doesn't tan the same way. You almost don't mention it at the appointment. Your doctor glances at it for 2 seconds and says it's nothing, already reaching for the door handle. For most of human history, that same 2-second glance would have gone very differently. That same mark could have gotten you killed, because for thousands of years, your ancestors believed the body kept a record, not of illness, of allegiance. A mark on the skin wasn't a symptom. It was a signature. Proof of a deal made somewhere you couldn't see, with someone you couldn't name. And once your neighbors decided to look for it, they usually found it. So what was the very first sign someone used to decide another person was practicing dark magic? The answer isn't a spell gone wrong or a black cat crossing a path. It's smaller than that, stranger than that. It's a shape on the skin that almost anyone could have. Long before witch trials, before courts, before any formal system of accusation, communities were already reading bodies as evidence. In ancient Mesopotamia, a set of ritual texts known collectively as maklu, meaning burning, laid out detailed procedures for identifying and symbolically destroying whoever was responsible for sending a curse. These weren't secret texts hidden from ordinary people. They were practical manuals used by trained exorcist healers who read a patient's symptoms less like biology gone wrong and more like a crime scene. Evidence pointing toward a person who had to be somewhere behind it, a rash in the wrong place, an eye that wandered, a fever that arrived in the middle of the night for no obvious reason. None of these were treated as medical observations. They were clues in an invisible investigation, and the investigation always ended at a person. But the sign that would define centuries of persecution came later, and it had a name: the witch's mark. By the 15th century, European authorities writing about witchcraft had settled on a theory that sounds almost bureaucratic in its cruelty. If a person had made a pact with the devil left proof. A mark. Sometimes a mole, sometimes a birthmark, sometimes a patch of skin slightly paler or slightly rougher than the skin around it. Sometimes a third nipple, which medical texts at the time treated as proof of a pact rather than the rare but real developmental trait modern medicine now recognizes it to be. The handbook that spread this idea furthest was the Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer. It described the devil's mark as something that could be hidden anywhere on the body, and it gave investigators permission to search for it however they needed to. Shave the accused. Strip the accused. Examine every inch, because guilt, according to the text, was written on the skin in a language only the examiner could read. This is where the twist most people don't expect enters the story. The mark itself didn't have to look sinister. It just had to be found by someone who had already decided to look. Communities developed something close to a profession around this: the witch pricker. A person, sometimes hired, sometimes self-appointed, whose job was to search the accused's body for a spot that didn't bleed and didn't feel pain when pricked with a needle. That spot, they claimed, was the devil's mark, insensitive because it no longer belonged fully to a human body. Some historians have documented pricking tools with retractable points designed to appear to pierce skin without actually doing so, guaranteeing the correct result regardless of what was really there. In 17th century England, a man named Matthew Hopkins built an entire career on exactly this, styling himself Witchfinder General and traveling from town to town charging a fee for every accused witch he could identify. The incentive was built directly into the job. The more marks he found, the more he was paid. And the accused had no real way to disprove a verdict already decided by a needle nobody but him was allowed to inspect. In trials across Scotland and parts of continental Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries, this single test could end a life. Here's what almost none of the accused understood at the time, because almost no one understood it yet. Many of the marks being hunted were completely ordinary. Moles, skin tags, vitiligo, a condition where patches of skin lose pigment, birthmarks caused by clusters of blood vessels or extra pigment cells, areas of reduced nerve sensitivity from old scarring, nerve damage, or simply skin that had thickened over time. None of it was supernatural. All of it was human variation, the same variation that exists in every population on Earth, in every era, including the one you're living in right now. Skin has carried this kind of weight before and since. Long before the witch trials, and in some places long after them, visible skin conditions like leprosy triggered a similar response. Isolation, forced marking, entire legal categories built around what a body looked like rather than what risk it actually posed. the specific fear changed shape across centuries and cultures. The underlying logic barely moved at all. If you can see it, you can act on it, and a community under enough stress will very often choose acting on something over admitting it doesn't understand what's actually happening. The people most likely to be accused weren't random, either. Historians studying witch trial records have found the pattern again and again. Older women, often widowed, often poor, often living alone at the edge of a village, were disproportionately targeted. Their bodies had simply lived longer, which meant more moles, more scars, more of the ordinary marks that come with age. Suspicion didn't need evidence. It needed a body that had already been pushed to the margins, and then it needed permission to look. Picture how this would have actually played out for one specific person. An older widow, alone since her husband died, with no son to speak for her and no household to vouch for her character. She has lived 70 years, which means 70 years of scars, moles, and sagging skin that a younger body simply hasn't had time to develop yet. A neighbor's cow stops giving milk. A child in the village falls sick. Someone remembers she muttered something under her breath the week before, or simply that she has always seemed a little too alone, a little too unreadable. The examiners arrive. They find a mark, because on a 70-year-old body, they were always going to find one. The needle goes in. Whether it actually causes pain matters less than what the examiner had already decided to report. By the time anyone thinks to ask whether the mark meant anything at all, it's already too late for it to matter. And once a community was primed to see marks as meaning, they saw them everywhere. A birthmark on a child was watched from infancy. A skin condition that ran in families made entire households suspect across generations. The body wasn't just examined during an accusation. It was surveilled long before one. This is the part of the story that should feel uncomfortably familiar because it never fully went away. It's tempting to think you've outgrown this kind of thinking, but look at how quickly a visible difference still gets narrated into a story about character. A scar is read as danger. A limp is read as weakness. A skin condition is still, in some communities today, treated as something to hide rather than something a body simply does. You've swapped the language of devils and pacts for the language of impressions and first judgments. But the underlying habit is the same one that filled courtrooms 500 years ago, turning an ordinary physical trait into evidence for a story you'd already decided to believe. A stranger with a facial scar gets crossed on a dark street for no reason you could defend out loud. A job candidate with a visible skin condition gets quietly marked down before a single question is asked. Nobody today calls it witchcraft. The mechanism doesn't need the word to keep working. The witch's mark was never really about the mark. It was about a community's need to locate danger somewhere specific on someone specific so the fear itself would have somewhere to land. A mole doesn't cause famine or sickness or a bad harvest. But a mole on the right person at the right moment of collective anxiety could be made to explain all three. That's the real strangeness at the center of this. The first sign of witchcraft was never magic. It was ordinary human skin, read by frightened people who needed an answer badly enough to invent one. It took centuries for that to change. Centuries of slowly separating what a mark looked like from what it actually meant. Modern dermatology now has real names, causes, and harmless explanations for nearly everything a witch pricker or an inquisitor once treated as evidence. Melanocytes, capillary malformations, autoimmune depigmentation, ordinary variation in nerve density. None of it required a devil. All of it required patience the accusers never had, and evidence standards nobody in the 15th century was remotely interested in meeting. So the next time you glance down at a mark on your own skin and your doctor tells you it's nothing, sit with how recent that reassurance actually is. For most of the people who ever lived, that same mark wouldn't have ended with a shrug. It would have started a story about who you really were, told by people who had already decided the ending before they ever looked.